Good morning.
Good morning.
I just got back from Europe last night where I was selling North Carolina and trying to bring jobs to North Carolina. And one of the great things I got to sell was the university system. And it's a great sell. And so I'm still recovering from a little sleep, but it is great to be here in Chapel Hill this morning. And I'm here to really talk about jobs. And jobs that relates to some important work that the universities must continue to form and continue to build relationships with each other. So North Carolina can be competitive not only throughout the United States but throughout the world, and I think our universities will continue to lead that effort, but we now got to take it to another level if we're going to continue to compete, because I'm telling you, after going to Europe and as we've been recruiting for the last 2 years during my term as governor, the competition is very, very tough, and it's even getting tougher as we speak today. I'd like to also thank you for welcoming Lee Roberts yesterday to this distinguished board. As you can see, I don't even have to be there. I'm sure Lee Roberts impressed you with his knowledge, with his commitment, with his passion. His learning curve is second to none in such a short period of time. I'm just very lucky to have another very talented member join my team and join North Carolina's team. So I know he was very upfront with you. He was a great listener, and he's a great communicator, too, and I'm very lucky to have him. I also want to say this, that when I became governor, I also looked back at my career as a mayor. And one lesson I learned as a mayor during my 14 years as mayor of Charlotte, and I immediately saw it as governor, is this, is that if we're going to be competitive for new jobs in North Carolina, we're going to have to increase the amount of venture capital coming into North Carolina. And the universities are going to have to play the major role to do just that. Because the fact of the matter is, as a mayor and as governor, when I especially run into the 20 and 30-year-old entrepreneurial spirit that comes to our universities and then starts up jobs, the biggest complaint they have about North Carolina is, where do I get my hands on venture capital money? How can I convey some of this research and knowledge that I have and create the commercialization? And to me, that is one of our great challenges. So one of the first things I did was I wanted to see how much of that was true and how much of that was false. So I went out to California with Steve Nelson and met with venture capitalists in California, because I wanted to see what they had to say about North Carolina. And they gave me extremely strong feedback, both good and bad. I've met with the venture capitalist groups here in North Carolina on many occasions at the Executive Mansion and visiting them. And I wanted to hear what their feedback was on their strengths and weaknesses. And I also have had wonderful meetings with your chancellors at the Executive Mansion and talking about our strengths and weaknesses regarding venture capital and research. And because of these initial meetings that began 2 years ago, we have formed a group which Thomas Stiff will be talking about just in a few minutes, and 2 members of that group will be giving you the conclusions of some of our reports about how can we make North Carolina even stronger in research and venture capital. The good news is, as I open up the newspaper today, a headline here on the front page, it's not about me today, thankfully, or about you. It says, more venture capital flowing into the region. That's a good headline. And some good results this quarter. One of the best quarters North Carolina has ever had in this region. But we're now the 9th largest state, most populous state in the United States of America. Number 9 and number 10 in venture capital isn't good enough. Because this is my goal right here. My goal is to be a part of the national innovation triangle. We must continue to build on our state's legacy of innovation because it increases jobs and wages in North Carolina. In fact, 1/3 to 1/2 of U.S. economic growth comes from innovation. Innovation has a multiplier effect of 5 times across sectors and skill levels. So every innovation job spurs 5 other jobs. North Carolina has the raw materials and the tools to be a leader in innovation, especially with the research conducted by our universities, where we rank 5th nationally on a per capita basis. Our public and private research institutions are one of North Carolina's biggest competitive advantages, with more than $3 billion in research conducted annually. Again, I've hosted representatives from NC State, Chapel Hill, UNC Charlotte, ECU, Duke, Wake Forest, and other private schools that receive federal grants at the Executive Mansion. And we have been forming a coalition among public and private schools in North Carolina. And by the way, while I'm at it, that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I got from California almost 2 years ago, is that you need to take advantage of the public and private universities together and not segregate the two in research opportunities and branding opportunities for the state of North Carolina. I'll be very frank, and I've said this to my good chancellor friend, UNC Chapel Hill, and at NC State. In California, one of the biggest messages was Duke is a major player. In California, they know who Duke is, and we all not separate ourselves from them because they've got a great reputation, a strong alumni network like many of our schools represented by the chancellors to my right. So we need to work better as a team, and we've already begun that process during the last 2 years. A major objective of our jobs plan is the Innovation of Jobs Initiative, and we have got to convert more of our research dollars into products and services that are patent and introduced in the marketplace. If we do not do this, if we don't continue to convert more of our research dollars into actual commercialization, we will not get as much research dollars in the future. And the MITs and the Harvards and the Stanfords and the Michigans and the Texases will get it, because they're going to start measuring more, not just who does the papers, but what do you do with the papers. And we're making tremendous progress in that. We've got to nurture the entrepreneurial spirit, and that is the key to achieving this goal in North Carolina. We can't continue just to accept federal grants, only conduct studies that sit on the shelf. We've got to get these studies off the shelf and find the entrepreneurs to commercialize them. And we've got to have policies in our universities and in the private sector and with state government regarding our tax policy to make it conducive to do just that in North Carolina. Now, North Carolina has had game-changing success of converting research to projects. Look at the companies like SAS, Cree, and Red Hat just in this region. But we need more of this technology transfer from universities to the private sector to make continued positive economic impacts on our state and bring more jobs. Our Innovation of Jobs Task Force, which includes members from the public and private universities, industry, and investors, has identified specific barriers that we have right now in North Carolina to commercialization. They have also developed some solutions, and you'll hear more about those findings in a few moments. I urge you to pay close attention to their presentation, because I can tell you that competing states and countries are producing similar recommendations. In fact, when I went to California almost 2 years ago, while walking out of a major venture capital office who invested in Google and Facebook, who walks in? Governor John Kasich from Ohio. And I go, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "What are you doing here?" They get it. And I run into Rick Perry, and I run into all the other governors as we go out and compete for jobs. I may have almost run into several in Europe yesterday. They're keeping us apart as the competition is getting tougher and tougher. But I know they were there, right on my heels. So my goal for North Carolina, and our goal for North Carolina based upon our research, is we have the Silicon Valley, which is in a different stratosphere. And let's admit, it's in a different stratosphere that is centered around Stanford University, with all the startups and incredible venture capital, not just national venture capital, but international venture capital coming into California. And it really does center around, it really started through their university research area, and it continues to grow. And then there's Boston area. Of course, you've got Harvard and MIT and other incredible academic institutions that also get a lot of federal research dollars, and you've got a lot of institutional money and venture capital money also in the Boston area. I want North Carolina to be the third vertex of that national innovation triangle that can compete successfully. Think about the advantages we have. First of all, look at the universities we have, and if I start naming them, I get in trouble. but they've been to the mansion. We've talked about this. Look at the universities that we have and the work that they have together, in addition to Duke and Wake Forest and other private institutions that seek federal money. And we form that coalition, we can be equal to these other two and be the vertex in the Southeast. And we can compete with them for talent. We can compete them of a quality of life second to none. And we can compete with them regarding affordability, which is going to be our major factor in competing against them. Because if the businesses see that they can start up here at a cheaper price and with a quality of life that's second to none, they're going to start adding up the numbers. But there has to be a synergy to make it happen. There's no doubt about it. So with your leadership and collaboration, and we continue this incredible innovation, we're going to make this happen and make it natural where people go to Silicon Valley, Boston, and North Carolina. And we've got the university network, we've got the talent, and I've got a great committee that now is going to give you the conclusions of some of the research that we've had and some of the recommendation. I want to first introduce my chief of staff, Thomas Stiff, who I stole from University of North Carolina right here. Thank you, Chancellor, for letting me steal him. He's helped head up this task force in addition to Chris Brown and Clay Thorpe, and they'll talk more about that. So this is very important for not only now, but in our future. Thomas Stiff.
We would just like to talk to you first of all about the process that we went through in looking at enhancing innovation within North Carolina. Then we'll talk more specifically about the recommendations that were brought forward, which was brought forward by the group over the last year. As you heard, the governor initially started this in the before the summer of May of 2013. We brought venture capitalists, private equity firms to the executive mansion to have an idea of what's missing in North Carolina and also what's working in North Carolina. They identified gaps in commercialization, gaps in venture capital, and as you heard the governor mention earlier, strongly suggested are literally going to Silicon Valley to see what's going right there and what we can do here in North Carolina to enhance our ecosystem. The governor personally traveled to the West Coast and heard from those folks that are doing what we are modeling our initiative on now. In April of this year, we brought together the university system, both public and private, to hear from them, to understand what's already going on our university campuses, the great innovation that's taking place now, but to also identify those ways that we can improve upon our existing system. As a result of that, Governor McCrory brought together the working group on innovation and jobs. And as I mentioned, you'll hear from the two co-chairmen in just a moment about the recommendations that came out of that group. But over the balance of 2014, they met not only as a group, and I'll just show you the members here, a excellent balance, both public and private sector universities, individuals that are involved in commercialization, and also our venture capital community. But they reached out to over 500 stakeholders throughout the state. They also asked for recommendations from those same stakeholders, and we got 20 to 30 detailed plans on how North Carolina can enhance our innovative ecosystem. The three main areas that were identified as we move forward to come up with specific recommendations were, first of all, translation. How do we take the innovation on our existing college campuses and fill those gaps? How do we make it more sufficient? They identified insufficient development and dissemination of information that's already going on our college campuses. The second was something that we had heard early in this process, and that was capitalization, but also that initial early stage company. How do you support them? How do you get that idea off the research bench and into that first stage of development? And the third bucket was operation. How do we identify the talent once we have stabilized and created those businesses? Where is the talent going to come from to actually operate those entities? And so first, Chris Brown will talk about three recommendations that deal with the early stage and how do we work more effectively with the university system. Chris.
Thank you, Thomas. The group worked very hard, and we took a lot of recommendations, and what we've come to realize and what people know in this field is that the the innovation commercialization landscape can be depicted as an ecosystem where one part depends on the other and they all feed back for a greater whole. Another way to depict this innovation commercialization landscape is in thinking of the analogy of a pipeline. This is the analogy that we used where one aspect feeds into the next, from early stage fundamental research through proof of concept, through market development and company and job creation. So this is, you'll see this graph, this figure a few more times as we overlay the recommendations that we made for the I2J working group. And what I'll do is talk about the first three, which are on the pre-commercial side of the figure, and then Clay Thorpe will talk about more of the commercial area. But there's overlap amongst all these. So there were 6 recommendations. The 3 that I'm going to talk about are the first 3. So let me go through those and share just a little bit of detail. The first one is the University Innovation Commercialization Council. This is where we will collect or convene folks from the university, from the investor community, from businesses that have worked with or want to work with the university to understand our best practices, the way we do things well, and areas where we can improve. This is a working group that in 6 to 9 months can develop a set of recommendations or practices that would, for one thing, allow standardization of practices where appropriate. Not every university needs to do everything exactly the same, but there are areas where there's overlap where we can be a little bit more conducive. It'll be a bit more conducive for outside entities to work with us. So that would be the work of the University Innovation Commercialization Council. This will not cost any additional funds for this. This is work we can do with what we have and the people that we have. The second one is the University Innovation Commercialization Grant Program. Those of you on the Board of Governors will recognize this. This fits in very well. It's actually one of our strategic plan objectives and is in the Board of Governors budget request that's going forward to the General Assembly this year. What this will do is provide for funding, this one does take funding, to move those early stage ideas that are coming out of the universities from the nonprofit research organizations, that to get them through that valley of death where there's no support, there's little funding to move those things to a more marketable situation. So this is a proof of concept fund. The idea here is that we would engage with investors in a stage-gated process where we would look at promising technologies and move them forward. The idea here is to add over 4 years, over 2 budget cycles, to have this running at about a $10 million per year operation. And then finally on this set of recommendations, the Small Business Innovation Research Matching Grant Program. This exists right now. It's run out of the Department of Commerce. And SBIRs and STTR, Small Technology Transfer, are federally funded opportunities for small companies to access funds, federal funds. What North Carolina has been a leader in is providing state funds to match that. And that gives these small businesses, where it's a competitive process to get the federal dollars, this gives them a bit more flexibility and a bit more money, of course, to really move this forward. Other states have copied this, and has resulted in a great deal of success. What we are suggesting here, that we bring this up to the $5 million level, which is about where it needs to be and where it has been in the past, to facilitate the small businesses as they move their operations forward. And a lot of that's going to take is going to be using university-generated intellectual property. So now I'm going to turn it over to Clay Thorpe to bring us home.
All right. I'll try to bring us home. Chris, thank you very much, and thanks for the time. I've been told that I'm ecumenical today with my tie. Want to make sure we represent everybody. And, what I want to say at one point is about the process, which my experience was incredibly inclusive, and the committee worked really hard. But I don't think we said, we interviewed and surveyed over 1,000 people in and around the innovation sector. I think 500 people responded, which is a remarkable response rate. And then we followed that up by actually asking for recommendations, and in order to submit a recommendation, you had to write it up in a one-page outline. We got 50 of those, which I think is a testament to our sector's energy around these ideas. So these ideas didn't just come out of thin air; they came from the community that we work with. Our committee actually met, I think, almost 10 or 12 times, a dozen times, which is, I want to thank everybody who was involved with that. It's remarkable. So shifting to the more the for-profit side of this and building the environment for these jobs to get created. I've been an entrepreneur in this sector for about 20 years. First 5 was working with companies. The last 15 has been working to build a venture capital firm. And when I started in North Carolina, there were, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 or 10 firms in North Carolina that were focused on investing in new technologies. Unfortunately, today, that number is down to about 4. So I wouldn't call it a crisis, but it's an area of significant concern. And in the meantime, our research funding has gone through the roof, as we all know. So part of what we spent time talking about is how we could provide some yeast to further, grow new competitors for me, frankly. I run a venture capital firm that has about $300 million under management. I would love for there to be more competitors for me. So we call this the Venture Multiplier Fund. The idea is that there'd be about $120 million allocated. These would be actual investment funds from state-related investment funds. And the idea is that about 3/4 of these dollars would be invested in venture capital funds, but not alone. These would actually be $1 for every $2 of private sector investment, at least. So if it's 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, that's all the better. Importantly, we would use these dollars to attract investors and managers from other parts of the country, preferably those who perhaps have an affiliation with NC State or Duke or UNC or Wake Forest, one of our institutions, or perhaps they're a native person that wants to come home. Second thing is that we would start something we call Site NC. So this really is a way of neutralizing the tax advantage or disadvantage that we might have as a state related to starting new innovation companies. The idea is that to some level there would be no tax related to capital gains for innovation-related companies, and that allows the governor and other people who are recruiting people to the state to offer some extra special incentive. We also would have some other ideas around crowdfunding that I know are in discussion now with Secretary Scavarla to further enhance those incentives. Finally, and this is really related to the outward-looking aspects that the governor talked about, is to have something called Rise NC. This is really about rallying and recruiting folks from outside of the state to come back home as entrepreneurs. We would strengthen an effort that's already started related to the Blackstone Entrepreneurial Network effort and make that more of a statewide endeavor. We'd also have fellowships to support younger people who want to be engaged in the entrepreneurial endeavor. And what we say is that this would really be a public-private partnership. So all the dollars wouldn't come from the state. There's already some private sector dollars allocated. Some of the universities might be able to allocate some dollars. And net, this would be really a way to leverage resources for the benefit of entrepreneurs. So this is a package, we think. We think together all of these recommendations are meant to build the ecosystem in North Carolina for new companies, new formations that, as the governor said, really leverage other jobs behind them. So I'll turn it back over to the governor to wrap us up. Thanks.
Very quickly, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you and Tom also. Tom, we really appreciate your teamwork in bringing these groups together. I'd like to thank all the chancellors who have been very, very active in these meetings and a part of these very, very, I think, progressive recommendations. I think there's a sense of urgency to this. As governor, myself and Secretary John Scavarla will be immediately making some recommendations as part of our legislative package to the legislature during this long session. And we're going to need your help in supporting those efforts. And we also want to work in partnership with you on making sure we're taking down any barriers which prevents us from doing anything, especially within our universities. And I think what you as a board need to do is make sure that you take down the barriers within our institutions to allow them to share, to allow those who are actually doing the research to commercialize, and to give incentives to do just that. And I think there are many steps we can take. There is a sense of urgency. The competition is doing this right now. And my goal is to beat the competition. And again, have us be the third part of that triangle. And North Carolina can make it happen if we work together as a team. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.